Hi, Facebook and YouTube. I'm going to get Instagram started really quickly, and then we're going to get started. Hi, Instagram. We are live on Instagram over here and on Facebook and YouTube over here. And we are going to talk about how I wrote a book in 11 days. Yeah, so my book, I don't actually have it right here with me, but my book, Honestly Always You, is coming out in a week. 1 week from today, August 24th. It's my first steamy romance, and I had such a fun time writing it. Editing was a different story, but we'll get to that. But I had such a fun time writing this book. I wrote Honestly Always You back in the summer of 2020. So I started kind of right around Memorial Day. So it was the end of May, early June, and it took me actually kind of technically it was 10 days from the point when I started it to when I wrote the end. But then the next day I went back and added in some scenes I knew needed it. And so I had kind of a complete first draft. I'll say kind of a complete first draft in 11 days. So I'll walk you through that process. I wrote down some notes so I didn't remember, so I wouldn't forget certain things. But I wanted to, I just wanted to share the story because I think it's really fun to hear how other authors write their books and how long it took them and their process. And I also, depending on how you're here, I do write novels. I am working on obviously releasing my first steamy romance. I also have the Codex series, which is a romantic action adventure series that's actually, I would consider it kind of closed door. So there is romance in it. There is, doesn't have a lot of language, doesn't have any on-page sex or anything like that, but this book does. And I felt like telling the story of Mandy and Justin, and Honestly Always You was important to have that conversation, that part of their story, as far as the language and the on-page sex. So before we get really into all of it, I'll kind of start from the beginning, but feel free to ask any questions. Like I said, I want this to kind of be fun and interactive. I like to learn about other authors' process. So I think it would be fun if we just had a conversation. So I did have a few comments, so we'll go through those first. So yeah, 11 days. Yes, I actually did write the book in 11 days. We'll talk about how that went down and how I was able to get it done in 11 days. And then, impressive, thank you so much. Someone asked, will you say this in IGTV? Yes, I will. It will be, and my hair is just in my face today. I will say this is an IGTV, provided nothing happens, knock on wood. But yes, I do intend to say this is an IGTV, so you can go back and watch it later. And it always is saved on Facebook and YouTube as well. So if it doesn't show up as an IGTV, then I can drop the link to the YouTube in my bio. So you'll be able to watch the replay. But yes, thank you for being here live. I am so excited to talk about this. And I apologize. My book is sitting over there across the room. So I'm not going to go get it to show you. But you can see it on my feed, Instagram, Facebook. And I'm sure YouTube will see it at some point because we're going to do a live later on about it. I'll talk about later. Yeah, so my first steamy romance, Honestly Always You, is set about 3 years before the start of the Codex series. And so in my mind, that was kind of 2014, 2015, because The Secret of the Codex released, it was published originally in 2018. Yeah, so I actually started writing The Secret of the Codex back in 2008. So I didn't back it up that far. But I figured keep with the continuities when it was published. Now, that being said, I didn't really write it like a historical novel, but I also didn't want to I wanted to make sure the technology wasn't so advanced, like, 5 years in the future like it is now. So really the only thing that I paid attention to was their phones and how they unlock their phones, because that was about the only thing that seemed relevant. So I made sure that it was like they used the code to unlock their phone. Remember when you had to do that every time? Yeah, so I made sure that was the case. Instead of like a Face ID or what they call this print, fingerprint, anyway. Okay, so let's talk about the story. So first of all, when I wrote the Codex series, Mandy and Justin are two of the main characters in the series. If you've read it, you will recognize those two because they are pretty important to the story. But when I got to the Codex series, when I started The Secret of the Codex, I actually did not, they were already together, and I did not know how they got together. I knew that, like, I had always, when I started writing Secret of the Codex, I just knew that they were together. Like, I saw them as a couple. I saw that that's like from the point of the story that I started, they were a couple. And so that's who they were. And so after I wrote The Secret of the Codex, and then I wrote The Prophecy of the Codex, and it was coming out, and I wanted to release that one, I started to get the idea, because Prophecy of the Codex was released last year. But before I released that book, I started to get this idea, and I was in a writer's group, and I don't even remember the discussion, but somehow something in that discussion triggered in me and said, I wonder how those two got together. Now, I had done a YouTube video about it, about the different tropes in my work in progress, which at the time was Prophecy of the Codex. And I speculated what their story was. Like, I talked about the different tropes, where like Kayla and Grady were kind of like acquaintances to lovers, I guess. They were coworkers. I mean, I guess it could probably be considered like an office romance, but they really kind of fell in love like in the field. So it's not technically office, if you think of it that way. I don't know. Anyway. And so how the other people came together, some were like insta love, or I don't really have any enemies to lovers, but stay tuned for that, because that may come up later in the Codex series. Anyway, so getting back to Mandy and Justin's story, I didn't know how they got together. And I knew when I speculated originally, I was like, well, maybe I'll get to it, but I really just can't. Like, I would sit there and like figure out how did they actually get together? I don't know. But because I am a pantser, I actually had to write it to find out. That's just how my brain works. So I decided to write Mandy and Justin's story. And it was kind of like this idea in my head. I was like, well, I'll see how things were going. I will kind of play around. You know how you let your subconscious work on things for a while, see if it sticks. Because sometimes, and I don't know if it's like this for you, but I have like a ton of ideas. And I have to like wait for them to gestate a little bit, wait for them to grow and see if they'll actually turn into anything. This one did, obviously, because I'm releasing the book in next week. But so what happens with me usually when I'm writing, or when a story idea won't let me go, is sometimes this happens, I have a scene that's so clear in my head, it starts writing itself. And frequently, my hair's on my neck today. It's like cold, but it's August, so I have a sweater on. Yeah. Anyway, it's amazing, by the way. I love this weather. Anyway, okay, so off track. So the story idea, I had woken up one morning and I had been mulling over this idea, you know, like using the shower, or, you know, just while you're getting ready or driving or whatever it is, you kind of have this idea in the back of your head. It's kind of working itself out, your subconscious. My subconscious does a lot of work for me, let me tell you, when it comes to writing. So I woke up one morning and the scene, I believe it was the opening scene, started writing itself. And I'm like, I have got to get this down. So I got out of bed. I started typing, started writing. And it just started to flow. It just started to come. And I was like, okay, this is pretty awesome. I didn't even know like how it started. I didn't know where Mandy was. Turns out she was already in a relationship. The guy was a jerk. Stupid Dan. Anyway, you'll understand once you read, honestly, always you. But that's kind of like where we start out. Mandy's already in a relationship with somebody else. She's been in a relationship for 3 years. It's the night before college graduation. Justin's kind of in her friend group a little bit, but they've had some conversations in the past. So I would say they're kind of friends, but Mandy's kind of hung up on this guy that she's with. Justin's kind of hung up with her, but she doesn't know that. That's kind of the unrequited love part. Anyway, okay, so let me make sure I'm talking. Yes, want to write the origin story. Yeah, okay. So let's keep going. The disappointment was real. Yes, I know. Why do some guys just not nice? there are plenty of guys that are nice, including my husband, but some guys just aren't nice. They make good material for books though, right? So anyway, so let's just talk about the writing process. So when I started writing, honestly, I always do, which by the way, it did not become, that title didn't come about until like right before I started talking about it. Like I did not have any clue what to call it. Like I was messaging one of my friends who had read the book, one of the early versions of the book. So I apologize to her for not, for what she had to read, because it was not a complete story. I'll get to that. I was like, come on, I got to have some ideas for this. And so she gave me some pointers, like where to look. And I don't know. So I ended up actually coming up with the title from something I had written in. So again, we'll get back to that. But I just started writing. I basically cleared my schedule. Now, if you remember what was happening at the end of May, June, early June last year, there was a lot of stuff going on in the world. It's the pandemic, it's Black Lives Matter, but it wasn't the Black Lives Matter movement that was the issue. There was a lot of like cancel culture going on and a lot of unhealthy things happening on social media at the time. And I just could not deal with it at the point. So I needed to step away, and I knew that I needed to. So I basically stepped off of social media for those 11 days. And I said, I'm going to write this book because this is what my soul needs right now. This was my form of self-care. And I've always kind of thought that, maybe not always, I've only recently realized it, but my writing is a form of self-care for me. It's actually, a lot of people talk about journaling, and journaling in the traditional sense is not something that's ever been easy for me. Not to say that it's not beneficial, and not to say that because it's not easy, it's not important to do. But I also find that a lot of when I'm dealing with issues, I work them out in my fiction. So it's also another theory I'm like working on in the background. We'll see how that plays out. But so I found out this was a way for me to express my feelings, to also escape a little bit from all the heaviness going on in the world, and find a happy place where I could create something and I could just tell the story that needed to be told, that was begging to be told, really, and get it out on the page. And, at the end, I had a finished book. So here are some of the things that I did. First of all, over those 11 days, like I said, I cleared my schedule. I was working from home at the time, still am. So I was able to clear my schedule for those 11 days. I realized that is a privilege not afforded to a lot of people. But I was able to do, I think I had 2 days where I wrote over 10,000 words. And I had at the time done my personal best, which I think was, I can't remember, 11,000 something. I think my personal best now is 13,000 or something, because when I get in like writing mode, I'm like in writing mode, like for real. like it's like, don't talk to me. I'm just going to eat whatever leftover in the fridge. Like I'll stay hydrated and fed. But other than that, I am writing. Don't disturb me. So I get really focused. That's like one of my strengths. Also can be a weakness sometimes, but I do get really focused when I'm writing. So I had several high word count days. And at the end of my first draft, I ended up, and I wrote it down. Yes, 58,000 words. So that was what my first draft ended up being. Now, the final version is actually over 70,000 words. So yes, I did not write all 70,000 words during my first draft, but that's okay, because that's what the editing process is for, right? I ended up adding 12,000 words in the editing process. It really needed to be there. But when I originally wrote the book, I actually wrote the book from Mandy's point of view first. And so I wrote like her whole story. And I've done this before. This was how I wrote Prophecy. I wrote like the main character's story. And then I like wrote myself into a corner because I didn't know what happened next because I needed to know what the other members of the story were doing, other characters, so that they would cross paths and then I knew what was coming up next. Because that's like I said, I'm a pantser. Some people may call it discovery writer. Like, I don't know what's happening in the story until I actually write it down. It's very hard for me to conceptualize a plot unless I've typed it out in story form. Because I tried to plot my first book and it was just a disaster. Nothing that was in that, not very much that was in that outline actually happened, because I had to rework it. And I was like, why am I doing this? This seems like a waste of time. Therefore, I pants now. And it's the most fun part of writing for me because I truly get to tap into my intuition and into my full creative process and my full creative expression and write all of the things that I was meant to write. Okay, so question, would this live be saved? Yes, I should have this up on IGTV as the replay after the live is done. It's always on Facebook and YouTube as well. All right, let's go. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them there and we can talk about those. It's the same. Yes, I understand that. Really impressive. 10,000 words. Well, thank you. Like I said, when I write, I really get in the mode. But the flip side of that, January and February of this year, I drafted book 3 in the Codex series. And in those 2 months, I actually wrote, I want to tell you the right amount. I can't remember. But I think it was, let's see. Yeah, I think it was 100,000 words. So I basically did 2 nanos back to back, January and February of this year. But then I went like 4 or 5 months and I did not write a single thing. So that's the trade-off. Like, when I get in the zone, this is how I am. I just, like, my brain just, that's how it works. I get in project mode. So when I'm in the middle of a project, I like write it down. I got to know what happens. But then I burn out, have to take a break, and then it takes me time to get back to it. Thankfully, I have started writing again. Not lately, in the last couple of weeks, but I do have a book I'm working on. Anyway, okay, so yes. Leave your questions. Okay, tell us about the ISBN number. If you could explain that a little bit more, I can go back to that. Yeah, okay, so let's keep going. All right, so the things that I had going for me, and honestly always do, that allowed me to draft it more quickly than I would another book is, one, it was a romance. Romance, first of all, I love romance. It's my favorite thing to read at the moment. I've been reading romance probably for not very long, just a few years, but it's almost all I read right now because I mostly all read ebooks and I read a lot of ARCs, and a lot of my friends are romance writers. So there you go. But I do love romance. However, it can be less complex to write than my Codex series, for sure, because my Codex series is multiple points of view. It's a very complex story. There's a lot of things going on. There are a lot of characters. I write from like all the different characters' perspectives. I write from the antagonist perspective. I write from like the secondary characters' perspective. So I'm trying to have all of these disparate characters and bring them all together into a coherent story, hopefully coherent, and have all of their hopes and dreams and their conflicts and flesh those out well and have every storyline resolve itself. And so it's very complicated to write. A romance is typically 2 points of view. I think that's right, points of view. 2 points of view. And they have not always similar conflicts, but you usually have like like a inner conflict or something that they're trying to overcome for each person. So it is less complex to write. So typically you can write romance more quickly than you would, say, a fantasy book or something like my Codex series, where it's action adventure. It's a series. So it's like the overarching story for 4 books. So more complicated. You're constantly bringing in villains and things like this. So that was one of the things I had going for me. The second thing I had going for me was that they were characters I already knew and loved. But let me take a drink of water before I continue. I already knew and loved Mandy and Justin. However, I did not love Justin so much. I'm kidding. Of course I love Justin, but I did not know him very well. Like, I didn't quite understand what made him tick. I didn't quite understand why he was so like funny all the time, like why he was always cracking jokes. And I suspected, okay, yeah, I mean, like, for me, because I just analyze things, I'm like, okay, if somebody's always trying to deflect with humor, there's probably something, some past pain or something that they're trying to compensate for in, you know, in their past, or something happened to them, you know, that would make them like that. But when I wrote Honestly Always You, and I got into Justin's head, and I was able to actually, like, I'd written from his viewpoint before in the Codex series, but in order to really get into, and it's funny, I'll get back to this, but it's funny because my first draft, because it was mostly written from Mandy's point of view, I knew that I had to go back and add in Justin's perspective. So I actually put in Justin's perspective as I went. I think had the whole book, pretty much the whole book, written from Mandy's perspective. And I almost wondered if it should just be from Mandy's perspective. I said, no, and this is the feedback that my friend gave me when she read the original version, is like, I don't really know what Justin's doing here. Like, what's his motivation? What is, you know, what is going on in his head? And so once I figured that out and fleshed that out, I was able to add in scenes with Justin. So the book itself now actually has the dual POVs, and it kind of goes back and forth. So, and I actually rewrote some scenes from Justin's perspective so that it wasn't so skewed in Mandy's favor, but it ended up working out. So in the process of writing Honestly Always You, I actually got to know Justin a whole lot better. Like, this guy is like great. Like, he annoyed me, honestly. In the first 2 books of the Codex series, I'm like, why are you joking all the time, dude? Can't you take anything seriously? And when I came to understand his motivations, and I came to understand what made him tick and why he acted the way he did, and just the things that made him feel vulnerable, and like just understood him as a person. I know he's fictional, but as a person, I really realized how much he was like me, which all our characters are like us. But I realized what aspects of him were like me, and especially the things I was dealing with as I wrote them. So, because of course my writing is a form of journaling. So it did help that I did already have the characters established. So I didn't have to like go through and figure out character profiles, figure out who they are. And this is the book I'm working on currently. Is completely different. Nothing in the Codex world at all. And I'm having a little trouble with the characters because I don't know them very well yet. So that's why it's kind of going slow for me. All right. And then, oh, and another thing I had going for me, and then I'll answer some more questions. Another thing I had going for me as I was writing it is I knew where they were going to end up, because I had already written the Codex series. So this was this is pretty much a prequel to the Codex series. And so I knew that they were going to end up together. And I knew in 3 years they were going to go to Belize and discover something, and meet up with Kayla and Grady, and then they were going to become friends. Like, I knew all of that when I started this book. So in some ways that can be a little tricky, because I had to make sure that whatever happened in this book kind of flowed and actually ended up there. But in some other ways, it was like, okay, well, I know where it's ending up, so I just got to make sure I get them there in a, you know, good way. So, and like I mentioned, next thing I had going for me was, I already mentioned this, but that I just could devote all my time to it. I basically cleared my schedule, and this is all I did for 11 days. Okay, so someone is asking about the ISBN number. Talk about the number you have to get before you publish the book. So it's kind of off topic, but I will address it so that we can get your questions answered. Okay, so an ISBN number is the number, and I'm not really well versed on this, but I'll tell you what I know. It's the number that basically is assigned, it's a unique number assigned to each book. I don't know, international book number, I don't know. International serial book number. That's my best guess. Anyway, so it's, like I said, a unique number that you get assigned to your book so that it can be identified by its number instead of just, you know. So every book does need an ISBN. I believe you can get an ISBN through Amazon if you only intend to sell through Amazon. Otherwise, you need to go to your country's platform for purchasing ISBNs. Now in the US, it's called Bowker, BOWKER. I think it's like myidentifiers.com is where you go, and you can purchase one, you can purchase 10, you can purchase 100 at a time. You get savings, obviously, if you buy more. But you do need an ISBN for your book. It's not the same as a barcode, but it is the number that goes on your barcode. So, and then you go into the ISBN website, the My Identifiers, and you assign your books. You pick which ISBNs you own, assign it to the book you're releasing. You need one for an ebook and then a separate one for a paperback. And I believe a separate one for an audiobook as well. Don't quote me on that though, because I haven't done audiobooks. And then you assign those in your My Identifiers. And then when anyone looks at the ISBN number, like for example, if you search it on Google, your book will come up because it's a unique identifier for your book. So yeah, make sure you're buying them through a legitimate source. Like I said, in the US, it's Boker. Anywhere else, you'll have to figure out what it is. It's not the same as ASIN, which is Amazon's identifying number. So it's Amazon's unique number. So you have both. You kind of do your own research on whether, how to do the ISBNs and stuff like that. Generally, the ISBNs are listed on the copyright page in your book, which both your paper book and your ebook should have. So, yeah. Anyway, okay. So another question: what about the main idea of the book? Do you think if we repeat it for several times in a few chapters to explain it to the other characters and go on from there, will this affect the story and make it boring? So it's book writing, and especially fiction writing, is a lot of, first of all, it's subjective, but storytelling comes into play, obviously, because you're telling a story, more so than any other thing. So it's a lot about the subtlety of it. You want to tell someone what is happening. Here I go again, like dinging up the show versus tell alert. You want to show someone, you want to show the reader what is happening instead of telling it to them. So if you have a main, and I don't necessarily you mean an idea of the book, like if you're talking about like a theme like forgiveness, you want to weave that into the story of your book without actually, and you can use the word forgiveness, obviously, but you don't want to be like, I am trying to forgive this person, or she is trying to, depending on how you write it. But you want to weave those themes carefully into the thread of the story without getting too complicated, without getting too prescriptive, and without getting too descriptive, because you want the reader to imagine the story for themselves. Okay, I hope that answered your question. If not, feel free to ask a follow-up, but we are going to keep going. This is kind of long today, but I just am talking about my book, so that's how it goes. Okay, so a few things that trip me up. So I wrote these down so that we can learn from my mistakes together. Anyway, okay. So what tripped me up? At first, I started only writing in Mandy's point of view. So yeah, it was tricky because I hadn't nailed down what Mandy was doing, what she was all about, what she was struggling with. I still added a few more things in once I did the edits, but it was really like hard for me to nail down what Justin was doing because I was seeing the whole story through Mandy's eyes. So when I was able to write in Justin's point of view in the edits, in the editing process, and by the way, those 12,000 words were some of Justin's point of view as I wrote the story, but also I didn't really have a good climax at the end of the story. Like it kind of like fizzled out. Because, and I know why this was, because I was writing the book as a happy escape and I couldn't deal with conflict at the time. Like I didn't want to put that into my book. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just have like, there's something that happens at the end of the book, and I left it in. But it's kind of like, yeah, I left it in, but there's something that happens where one of the characters, you're not quite sure if they're alive or not. Anyway, I'll just say that. And so, yeah, so at that point, that was like the most tension I could handle. I was like, no. But when I went through the edits, I was like, okay, this has to have more angst. And the whole thing about when you have an event that's like that, where it's a very physical, tangible representation of like, is this going to work out? Because, you know, the person might die. If you can layer that in, I'm sorry, they were like really loud. If you could hear that, they're like really loud people that drive by on occasion. It's so loud. Anyway, so if you can mix the physical danger or conflict or tension with emotional and like layer in the emotional part of it, then it becomes a richer story. It becomes fuller. And the reader engages more in the story. They engage in the emotional conflict, the emotional drama, and then they also see that echoed in the physical drama. And in this case, where, again, I don't want to tell too much, but where there is a threat to someone's life. So that's what I had to kind of write in. I had to get that emotional journey there. So it was kind of like, oh yes, there's this thing that happens in Mandy's life, and she is, it makes her kind of question things. Again, I'm not trying not to give too much away here. A thing that happens and makes her question things, but then it's like, okay, well, I need to show the process of her working through that and how Justin responds to that and how he works through that on his side. So that's kind of the bulk of what I added in those extra 12,000 words in the editing process. So I'm trying to be very, what's the word? Not forthright, but very open, very honest about the process. I didn't like write the first draft and it was done and I'm like, ooh, let's publish it. No, there was a lot that went into the editing process, and because I'm a pantser, that's how it works. But also, if you don't have a first draft, you don't have anything because you don't have anywhere to go. So yeah, anyway. All right, so yeah, okay. Looking at my notes to make sure. These are things that tripped me up as I was writing. So again, I talked about this. I didn't understand what was going on in Justin's head. I didn't understand his inner desires, his conflicts, his past traumas, the things that he was dealing with. Now, of course, when I'm hearing from Mandy's perspective, I knew certain things had happened in Justin's life. But for me, I like to write from multiple POVs because I really can, that's how I dig into the characters' thoughts and desires and things like that. Because I'm a pantser and because I guess it's intuitive writing, discovery writing, whatever you want to call it. That's how I see the story. That's how I see what happens, is I see it through a character's eyes. And so I have to write through from their point of view to do it. Anyway, all right. So yeah. And like I said, each process of writing for me is different. So each book has been different. The Secret of the Codex, I mostly wrote in chronological order. And there's probably a few things that I went back and added. I'm sure there was actually. And some things I took out because Secret of the Codex, I actually overwrote. I wrote 130,000 words and I cut it down to 120 before I published. Prophecy of the Codex was kind of the opposite. It was similar to Honestly Always You, where I wrote kind of like the heroes in their process and then I got stuck. And actually with Prophecy, I wrote in like a car accident. And I was like, and then I just got stuck and I'm like, this story is not going anywhere. What do I do with this? And it just, I think it was like weeks or months that I was like, this car accident is not feeling right. So I backed up and I took out everything that didn't feel right. And when I went back to the part in the story that felt right, and I was like, all right, I'll start from here and start again, and completely took out the car accident, thankfully. I don't even know how far back I backed up, but but I took out that part and the story just kind of flowed. Yeah. But each process, like I said, each process is different and each book process is different. And that's also what I want to tell you, because each book that you write, you are in the process of discovering your own writing process. Each book you write, yeah, it's a lot of writing and process. But anyway, if I was editing this for a book, for a client, I would not say writing and process twice in the same word. Anyway, okay. So, but you are in the process of discovering your unique writing style and the way that you write. And that's totally okay. You are not meant to write, you don't have to write every book the same. You can plot one book and pants the next one, and you can do a hybrid. You can do whatever you want when you're writing your book. That's the beauty of it. And so it's important for you to lean in to your unique process. Pretty much what I can say. Like all three books have been different. Kind of the last two have been slightly similar, but the book I'm writing right now, completely different. And it's just, you have to figure out what works for you. And the only way you're going to do that is by doing and trying and getting rid of the things that don't work and leaning more into the things that do. That's really all it is. All right, so follow up on the question we had earlier. I'm talking about like an event, like in this specific case, an event that happens that is important to the story. How do you talk about that without paging over the reader's head? Yes, so this can be tricky, and there's an amount of finesse involved. You definitely want to mention the event, and depending on the style, your style of storytelling, and how much you want the reader to know. Like I am reading a book right now where you know something happened, but you don't know what it is. And then as you read along, like she'll sprinkle in more clues of what happened, but you're still like, I'm not getting the full story. And then you finally get to the thing and you're like, oh, that's what happened. And so it makes sense. So you want to try to kind of sprinkle in those clues if you can. But if it's important, they know about the full event up front, that's fine too. It just depends on what the story needs and all of that. But you can talk about the event. But then once you mention the event and the details needed, don't do it again. Like you can allude to it, you can bring it in, but you have to be cognizant not only of what each character knows about a specific event or a specific thing, you also have to be conscious about what the reader knows. Your reader is kind of, and this is just off the top of my head right now, it's kind of like another character. Like you can't, if you're constantly telling the reader things that you've already told them, they're going to get bored. They're going to stop reading. That was part of why I nixed 10,000 words in The Secret of the Codex, because I was like, I'm beating my reader over the head with this. I don't need to tell them this again. I already told them this. So I took it out. And so it's important to kind of layer these things in. If you want to, even if you want to show the event on the page at the beginning and then just reference it, like there are certain ways to do it. Like, you know, the characters may have like a colloquial term for it. Like, you know, they probably not, of course I wasn't alive, but they probably did not know in the middle of, I don't know, World War II, that it was going to be called World War II, right? So some things get assigned, or a battle of, I don't know. Anyway, some terms get assigned to things after the fact. And so you have to be kind of cognizant of that and say, okay, so back in, you know, as it's happening, it's all this like people really don't know what's going on. People are scared. They're worried about what's going to happen. They're worried for the future. They don't know. Things are unclear. Things are uncertain. But as the event passes, they may have a certain way they refer to it. Even you can think of it even as like if it's like a high school type setting, even like the high school students could refer to it as like, you know, the 7th grade breakdown, or I don't know, something, but something that they would refer to it as. So it's a way to like reference that event without explaining all the events. And of course all the things that happened in the event. And of course you don't want to speak down to the reader. You don't want to have your characters speak down to the reader either. You want to make sure that you treat the reader with respect, because they are smart. They're going to be able to figure it out. And if they don't, they're going to be like, oh, I remember they mentioned something about that, so I'm going to go back and reread it because I didn't catch it the first time. And that's okay. Like some readers may want to do that. Some readers may just pass it over. It becomes not important to them. But don't beat your reader over the head with it, please. Okay. So I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover. If you guys have any questions, I'm going to do kind of a wrap up. If you have any questions while we're finishing, let me know. Just leave them in the comments. I'm monitoring both of those. Actually, more than both, all three on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So, moral of the story, if you want to write a book in 11 days, you can. It's tricky. You might want to make sure that you use your vacation days. And if you're a plotter, you will probably want to have it plotted out before you do that. I am a pantser. I write intuitively. The only way I know what's going to happen in the story, like I said, when I started Honestly Always You, I did not know their story. I didn't know how Mandy and Justin got together in the first place. Like I knew that they had been together for 3 years, which is why this happened 3 years before the Codex series started. So I knew they had been together for 3 years, but I hadn't actually thought through the process of like, how did they get together? Like, what were the circumstances? What were the tropes specifically? Like how did they, were they friends? Did they know each other? Was it instant love kind of thing? Was it something else. So I had to discover that in that process. And in the process of writing Honestly Always You, I did. And the bonus was that I discovered that Justin is an awesome book boyfriend as well. And also, by the way, yeah, I got some really angsty things coming up for them in the Codex series. So you'll be able to continue their story after you read Honestly Always You. So my computer is about to die. So we're going to wrap this up. Honestly Always You is available for pre-order right now in the ebook form. I do hope to have the paperback up soon. Amazon is not approving it right now. So I'm going to work with my cover designer and get that approved, hopefully very soon, so I can get the paperback live for you guys. But the ebook is for pre-order. It will hit your Kindles once your pre-order hit on Tuesday. So you can start reading and enjoy it. All right. Thank you guys so much. I love doing these Tuesday live series. I will be back next week for the book launch, but I'm going to do it a little bit later. So probably 6 p.m. Pacific, but stay tuned for that because we're going to do a little bit different for book launch day, but we're still going to be here. So, all right. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. All right. Thank you, Facebook and YouTube. I will talk to you guys later.